3 months ago, I was just another blue-collar guy trying to build a simple life. Today, I own an entire neighborhood, and the woman who tried to destroy me is sitting in federal prison. This is the story of how corporate greed, small-town corruption, and one massive legal mistake turned a carpenter's inheritance into the most expensive lesson a homeowners association ever learned. But before we dive into how I legally demolished an entire power structure with nothing but paperwork and patience, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, what's the craziest thing a neighbor has ever done to you? And let me know where you're watching from. Turns out HOA horror stories are universal. My name is David Chen, and 6 months ago I inherited something that would change my life forever. Not money, not stocks, not some fancy house. 7 acres of pristine Montana wilderness that my grandfather had quietly accumulated over 40 years of backbreaking work as a railroad engineer. Grandpa Liu had immigrated from Taiwan in 1962 with nothing but determination and a belief that in America, hard work could buy you freedom. Every paycheck, every overtime shift, every holiday bonus went toward one goal: owning a piece of land so beautiful that his grandchildren would never have to bow to anyone. Standing on that property for the first time, breathing air that tasted like pine needles and possibility, I understood why he'd sacrificed everything for this place. Eagle's Nest Creek gurgled through ancient granite boulders. Aspen trees whispered secrets in languages older than civilization. The Rocky Mountains stretched to the horizon like God's own cathedral, and for the first time since my divorce, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. I was 38, recently separated from a marriage that had suffocated us both, working construction in Denver and living in a studio apartment that smelled like other people's cooking. This land felt like salvation, a chance to build something real with my own hands and maybe prove to my 12-year-old son Jake that his dad wasn't the failure his mother claimed I was. The plan was simple: cash out my modest 401k, take a leave of absence from the construction company, and spend the summer building a small cabin where Jake could visit and see mountains instead of strip malls, breathe clean air instead of exhaust fumes, and watch his father create something instead of tearing himself apart. Construction work had taught me that the most satisfying projects start with solid foundations. I spent the first week clearing brush, marking boundaries, and laying the groundwork for what would become our weekend refuge. The rhythm of hammer on nail, the clean bite of saw through timber, after months of lawyers and custody hearings, honest physical work felt like therapy. That's when she appeared. Margaret Thorne emerged from a silver Lexus SUV like some suburban general inspecting a battlefield. Mid-50s, power suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, clutching an iPad and wearing the kind of smile that real estate agents practice in mirrors. Her heels clicked against the rocky ground with mechanical precision, and her perfume, something floral and aggressive, clashed with the mountain air so violently it made my sinuses burn. "Excuse me," she called out, marching across my property like she owned it. "Are you the individual responsible for this unauthorized construction activity?" I set down my circular saw, noting how she said individual like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "David Chen, building a cabin on my land. And you are?" "Margaret Thorne, president of the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association." She swiped through screens on her iPad with corporate efficiency. "This construction violates multiple community covenants, environmental regulations, and architectural standards. Frankly, this rustic approach threatens our property values significantly." I looked around at pristine wilderness stretching to the horizon. "What community? I don't see any houses." "The Sunset Ridge HOA governs all residential properties within our jurisdiction." She produced an official-looking document from her leather portfolio. "Your grandfather signed these covenants when our association incorporated 18 months ago. You inherited his legal obligations." 18 months ago. Grandpa Lou had died 2 years ago. She handed me a cease and desist order demanding immediate construction halt, plus a bill for $3,200 in accumulated violation penalties. "Remove all materials within 72 hours, Margaret announced with theatrical authority. "Daily fines begin at $750, doubling weekly until compliance is achieved." The threat hung in the mountain air like smoke from a distant fire. "Let me be direct, Mr. Chen." Her eyes swept over my work clothes, beat up forward and calloused hands with barely concealed distaste. "This isn't the type of neighborhood where people in your situation typically integrate successfully. We maintain certain standards regarding resident compatibility." The casual racism wrapped in corporate speak hit like a punch to the gut. This woman had researched me, knew about my divorce, my financial situation, probably my shoe size. But mentioning my situation, code for not being white and wealthy enough for her taste, crossed a line I wouldn't tolerate. "Are you threatening me because of my race?" Margaret's smile sharpened like winter wind. "I'm offering practical advice about community expectations. Some battles aren't worth fighting, especially when you're clearly outmatched financially and legally." She climbed back into her Lexus, pausing before driving away. 72 hours, Mr. Chen. Don't make this more unpleasant than necessary." As her taillights disappeared down the mountain road, Grandpa Lou's words echoed in my head from our last conversation. "In America, David, they will try to tell you that you don't belong. But if you own the land, you belong wherever you choose to stand." I stared at the cease and desist order, then at my half-built cabin. Margaret Thorne thought she had all the power. She was about to discover how catastrophically wrong she was. Margaret didn't wait 72 hours. She returned the next morning with backup, a nervous-looking lawyer who seemed like he'd rather be anywhere else, and a county inspector whose uncomfortable expression suggested this wasn't his idea. "Mr. Chen," Margaret announced with practiced authority, "you're being served with official legal documents. Cease construction immediately and prepare for significant financial consequences." The lawyer, a sweaty guy named Patterson who kept adjusting his crooked tie, shuffled through papers like he was looking for an escape route. "Pursuant to Sunset Ridge HOA covenants, you owe $18,000 in retroactive violation penalties. Furthermore, environmental impact assessments were never completed, potentially voiding your construction permits. 18 grand for building on my own land. The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't potentially bankrupting." "I'll review these with my attorney," I said calmly. Margaret's laugh cracked like ice breaking. "You can't afford an attorney, Mr. Chen. Save yourself the embarrassment and comply voluntarily." The inspector, a decent guy named Rodriguez who kept avoiding eye contact, handed me citations for building violations that would shut down construction completely. "Sorry, buddy," he muttered. "Orders from county planning. Someone's got serious pull in the administrative offices." After they left, I drove straight to the county courthouse. The clerk, a friendly woman named Susan, helped me dig through property records in a basement that smelled like old paper and bureaucratic secrets. What I found made my blood pressure spike into dangerous territory. The Sunset Ridge HOA had been incorporated exactly 18 months ago, 6 months after Grandpa Lou died. The incorporation papers showed a perfectly drawn boundary that included just 14 houses scattered across the valley, with my 7 acres representing nearly 40% of their total land area. "That's mighty suspicious timing," Susan whispered over the property maps. "Looks like someone drew those boundaries specifically to capture your grandfather's land after he couldn't object." I pulled more records. Every HOA board member was either related to Margaret Thorne or employed by companies owned by her husband's development firm. This wasn't community governance. It was organized theft with legal paperwork. But here's what Margaret didn't know about my background. Before construction work, I'd spent 4 years as a paralegal helping my ex-wife get through law school. I knew enough about contract law to recognize that dead people can't sign new agreements, and you can't retroactively bind property to covenants that didn't exist when you acquired it. Time for my counterattack. I called Rebecca Martinez, a sharp real estate attorney whose office smelled like fresh coffee and pure determination. Her conference table was covered with law books and case files, but she cleared space immediately when I explained the situation. "This is legally impossible," Rebecca said, spreading my documents across her desk. "You cannot retroactively bind a deceased person to covenants formed after their death. I've seen HOA scams before, but this is brazen even by their standards." She pulled out a yellow legal pad and started outlining our strategy. "We're filing countersuits for harassment, false claims, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and investigating how they included your property in boundaries drawn after your grandfather's death. But David, I need you to understand, this could get expensive and ugly before it gets better." I thought about Jake, about the cabin where we'd planned to spend summers fishing and building things together, about Grandpa Lou's sacrifice to give his family a place to belong. How ugly are we talking? These people have money and connections. They'll try to destroy your reputation, drag up every mistake you've ever made, make your life hell until you give up and sell to whoever's really behind this scheme. But Margaret escalated faster than either of us expected. 2 days later, my neighbor Bill knocked on my apartment door with a concerned expression and a beer. "David, you need to see this." He handed me his phone, showing a Facebook group called Sunset Ridge Community Safety Alert. My photo, stolen from my construction company's website, was posted alongside warnings about transient criminals with histories of domestic violence threatening our children and property values. The comments were vicious digital poison. "Get this predator out. Our kids aren't safe. Sheriff needs to investigate immediately." The lies were breathtaking in their creativity. According to Margaret's online campaign, I was a deadbeat dad with a criminal record who'd been stalking neighborhood children and making threats against community leaders. None of it was true, but fear spreads faster than truth in social media echo chambers. My ex-wife called that night, furious and frightened. "David, what the hell is going on? Jake's friends are showing him posts calling you dangerous. He's asking if he's safe visiting you anymore." The thought of my son reading those lies, having classmates whisper and point, made my vision blur with rage. Margaret had weaponized my own child against me, crossing every line that mattered. It's all fabricated, Lisa. I'm fighting a corrupt HOA trying to steal my land. Everything online is lies designed to force me to sell. Fix this, she snapped. Some family court judges consider social media scandals when reviewing custody arrangements. This could affect your visitation rights. After she hung up, I sat in my apartment surrounded by legal papers and the weight of what I was facing. This wasn't about property anymore. Margaret was threatening my relationship with the only person who truly mattered, but her digital warfare contained a fatal flaw. In her rush to paint me as dangerous, Margaret had posted the HOA's financial records publicly to prove they had money for legal action against troublemakers. Those numbers told a shocking story that Rebecca spotted immediately. "Look at this," she said, spreading the financial statements across her desk. $1.2 million collected in special assessments over 18 months from 14 houses. That's over $85,000 per family. For what? The HOA claimed the money went toward legal expenses, environmental consulting, and community infrastructure improvements. But there were no community amenities, no shared facilities, no infrastructure projects visible anywhere in the valley. David, this isn't just harassment anymore. This is massive financial fraud with federal implications. Rebecca's investigation uncovered a web of corruption that would make politicians blush, consulting fees paid to companies that didn't exist, legal services from Margaret's brother-in-law who lived in Florida, environmental assessments that were never performed but somehow cost $300,000. Margaret had been systematically looting the HOA treasury while preparing for something much bigger. The breakthrough came when Rebecca's investigator friend discovered a development proposal buried in county planning documents. Mountain Peak Resorts had approached local officials about a $75 million luxury spa and golf course complex. The proposed location required my 7 acres as the scenic centerpiece, spa overlooks, golf course elevation, helicopter landing pad access. According to the development agreement, construction couldn't begin without acquiring all residential properties within the designated tourism corridor. My land wasn't just in Margaret's way, it was the golden key to her treasure chest. "Look at this consultation fee," Rebecca said, pointing to a line buried in county documents. Mountain Peak paid someone $500,000 for community relations consulting. Suddenly, Margaret's aggressive timeline made perfect sense. She wasn't just collecting HOA fees, she was earning a massive commission for delivering my property to developers. Every day I held out cost her hundreds of thousands in resort profits. But corporate greed makes people sloppy, and Margaret was about to make a mistake that would destroy everything she'd built. The psychological warfare escalated when I woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of shattering glass and the acrid smell of diesel fuel burning my nostrils. Someone had taken a baseball bat to my construction materials, scattering lumber like giant pickup sticks across the building site. My generator lay overturned, fuel soaking into pine needles with that sharp chemical stench that made my eyes water. Roofing nails glittered across my access road like deadly confetti, strategically placed to shred any tire that dared cross them. The message was crystal clear. Margaret was done playing legal games. By sunrise, I discovered my truck sitting on 4 flat tires and an anonymous EPA complaint in my email claiming I was destroying protected wetlands. The wetlands in question were a seasonal creek that had been babbling through the property since before Margaret was born. But sabotage meant desperation, and desperate people make traceable mistakes. I'd learned during construction work that the best defense against theft is a good security system. I spent the next day installing motion sensors, night vision cameras, and audio recording equipment. If Margaret wanted to escalate to criminal behavior, she'd do it in high-definition color with stereo sound. I didn't have to wait long for the main event. Around 2 a.m., a pickup truck crept down my access road with headlights off, engine barely whispering through the mountain silence. The driver, wearing a hoodie that couldn't hide his familiar build, began pouring something from a gas can near my lumber pile. My cameras captured everything in perfect detail, including the moment he looked directly into a motion-activated spotlight, like a deer caught in headlights. Tyler Thorne, Margaret's 20-something son who'd apparently inherited his mother's talent for felony-level stupidity. The next morning brought my counterpunch. I walked into the sheriff's office with USB drives full of video evidence showing Tyler's midnight arson attempt, complete with facial recognition and license plate identification. Sheriff Williams watched the footage with the expression of someone discovering his coffee was actually motor oil. Well, hell, Margaret's boy just handed us attempted arson with premeditation. That's 5 to 15 years if we prosecute fully. But I wasn't finished digging. Rebecca's financial investigation had uncovered something that would make federal prosecutors salivate. The HOA's public filings revealed systematic fraud, security consulting payments to companies that existed only on paper, landscaping services from contractors who lived in different states, and legal research fees that would make Supreme Court justices choke on their coffee. Margaret had been double-dipping, stealing from neighbors while positioning herself for the resort payoff. She was robbing people today while planning to cash in on their land tomorrow. As I watched Tyler's arson footage for the third time, the mountain air carrying the scent of pine and approaching storm clouds, I realized something crucial. Margaret wasn't just greedy, she was trapped. The resort deal probably had deadlines, performance clauses, penalty fees for delays. Every day I remained on my land meant she risked losing everything. Cornered animals bite hardest just before they die. They also make the most spectacular mistakes. Margaret's response to her son's arrest was swift, vicious, and completely unhinged. She filed an emergency injunction claiming I was operating an illegal commercial facility and demanding the court force me to demolish everything immediately. The paperwork alleged I was planning to run a transient housing operation for undesirable elements that would destroy the moral fabric of their community. 18 pages of creative fiction that would have impressed Stephen King. Margaret wanted $150,000 in community damages and was asking for an immediate restraining order preventing me from entering my own property. But that was just the opening act. By noon, an army of county inspectors swarmed my land like locusts. Environmental compliance, building safety, septic evaluation, electrical systems, all writing citations for violations that didn't exist. Rodriguez, the lead inspector who'd been reluctantly cooperating with Margaret's scheme, kept apologizing under his breath while photographing my perfectly legal electrical work. Sorry, man, orders from way above my pay grade. Someone's paying serious money to make your life hell. The metallic taste of corruption hung heavier than the mountain fog rolling in. During my paralegal years, I'd learned that when legal intimidation fails, bureaucratic harassment becomes the go-to weapon. Endless inspections, impossible compliance demands, death by 1,000 paper cuts. But Margaret saved her cruelest blow for last. That afternoon, my ex-wife called, her voice shaking with fury and fear. "David, what the hell is happening?" Jake's school counselor called. "Kids are showing him Facebook posts claiming you're a registered sex offender. He's locked in his room crying, asking if his daddy is really a monster." My blood went Arctic cold. "What posts?" "Some community safety group with your photo and warnings about dangerous predators targeting children. Complete lies, but Jake's classmates are treating him like he's contaminated." Lisa's voice cracked with emotion. "He wants to know if he's safe visiting you anymore. David, some judges consider social media scandals when reviewing custody. This could destroy your relationship with your son." The thought of Jake reading those lies, having friends whisper and point, made my vision blur with rage. Margaret had weaponized my own child against me, crossing every line that separated business from personal destruction. "It's all fabricated, Lisa. I'm fighting a corrupt HOA trying to steal my land for developers." "I don't care about your land drama. Fix this immediately, or I'm filing for sole custody." After she hung up, I sat in Grandpa Lou's old workshop, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and motor oil, feeling 40 years of family history pressing down on me. This wasn't about property anymore. Margaret was threatening my relationship with the only person who mattered more than mountains or money. But her desperation had created my opportunity. That evening, Bill knocked with urgent intelligence. "David, Margaret's group posted another emergency alert claiming you threatened to burn down the neighborhood. They're using a photo of you holding what looks like a weapon, actually your circular saw, but cropped to look menacing." The Facebook comments were a digital feeding frenzy. "Call SWAT. Armed and dangerous. Protect our children." But Bill leaned closer with the real information. 3 HOA families approached me privately. "Margaret's threatening to sue them personally if they don't sign statements against you. They're terrified of her now, not you." More importantly, the HOA treasurer had been asking uncomfortable questions about missing money. Margaret had been dodging audit requests while demanding more special assessments from members already bankrupted by her previous schemes. "Treasurer Beth Morrison found invoices for work that was never performed," Bill whispered. "Payments to companies that don't exist. She's demanding a full financial review, and Margaret's panicking." This gave me the counterpunch I needed. The next morning, I drove to every business Margaret's family owned or frequented. Armed with screenshots of her false posts about me being a dangerous predator, I had calm, factual conversations with managers about their liability for supporting defamatory campaigns against local citizens. Small mountain communities survive on reputation. When the auto shop, grocery store, hardware store, and bank all suddenly became too busy to serve the Thorne family, word spread faster than wildfire through Valley gossip networks. By afternoon, Margaret's own mother called demanding an explanation for why the family was being shunned by local businesses she'd patronized for decades. That evening, as storm clouds gathered over the mountains and rain began drumming against my apartment windows, I felt the tide finally turning. Margaret had overplayed her hand, attacking too many fronts simultaneously while her financial crimes were being exposed by her own board members. But I also knew that desperate criminals don't surrender quietly. They detonate everything around them before going down. The smell of approaching rain mixed with pine sap reminded me of Grandpa Lou's final words about America being a place where ownership meant freedom. Tomorrow I would discover exactly what he meant, and Margaret Thorne would learn that some property rights have the power to destroy entire kingdoms built on lies. The next morning I was organizing Grandpa Lou's old papers when I found something that would change everything. Hidden behind a loose board in his workshop was a metal lockbox painted army green and secured with a combination lock that had probably been set during the Reagan administration. The musty smell of old documents hit me like a wave when I finally opened it. Using Grandpa's birthday, the hopeless romantic had used the day he'd first seen this land. Inside were manila folders thick as phone books, corporate documents that felt substantial as gold bars, and enough legal paperwork to supply a law firm. But it was the incorporation certificate on top that made my hands shake. Liu Holdings, LLC, incorporated February 8, 1985. Sole proprietor, Liu Wei Chen. My grandfather hadn't just owned 7 acres of mountain paradise. He'd secretly formed a holding company 38 years ago and used it to quietly acquire something that would change everything. The next document explained how he'd pulled off the financial coup of the century. In 2008, when the housing market collapsed like a house of cards, the original developer who'd built scattered homes throughout the valley went bankrupt. While everyone else was running away from real estate, Grandpa Lou stepped in like a ghost and bought up all the defaulted mortgage debt for pennies on the dollar. Not the houses, the actual land underneath them. Every single property in what would become Margaret's HOA kingdom was built on land that Grandpa Lou owned through his holding company. The homeowners had been paying their mortgages faithfully for over a decade, thinking they owned their land. But legally, they were tenants. And the property management company that collected their monthly payments forwarded everything to Liu Holdings LLC, which explained how a railroad engineer could afford his comfortable retirement while living modestly. I was holding the deed to an entire neighborhood, 23 houses, 14 of which had formed Margaret's precious HOA, all of them sitting on land that belonged to me now. The taste of Grandpa's pipe tobacco still lingered in the workshop air, mixed with the weight of documents that felt like they could move mountains. I understood now why he'd kept this secret buried. Owning people's homes without them knowing is the kind of revelation that destroys families and fractures communities. But it also meant something else, something that made my pulse hammer against my temples. Margaret Thorne, HOA president and queen of harassment, had been collecting fees and threatening fines on land she didn't own. Her own house, the command center for her campaign of intimidation, was sitting on property where she was 4 months behind on rent. I could legally evict her with 30 days' notice. The bank records in the lockbox showed everything. Monthly rent payments flowing into Liu Holdings accounts, property tax receipts, maintenance expenses for roads and utilities that the homeowners thought they were paying for through HOA fees. Grandpa Lou had been the invisible landlord for an entire community, collecting rent through a management company while letting people believe they owned their land. The incorporation papers were genuine, stamped with official state seals and notarized by attorneys whose signatures could be verified. The property deeds matched perfectly with county records. The bank accounts were real, and the money trail was clear as mountain stream water. I sat in Grandpa Lou's workshop chair, surrounded by the scent of old leather and forgotten secrets, holding papers that gave me more power over Margaret Thorne than she'd ever dreamed possible. I could evict every HOA member who'd participated in harassing me. I could sell the entire development to Mountain Peak Resorts and become a millionaire overnight. I could destroy lives the same way Margaret had tried to destroy mine. But Grandpa's words echoed in the dusty air. In America, David, ownership means responsibility, not just power. He hadn't said use power to crush your enemies. He'd said ownership comes with responsibility. There was a difference, and that difference would determine what kind of man I chose to be. The weight of Grandpa Lou's secret sat on my shoulders like a lead blanket as I spread the incorporation documents across Rebecca's conference table. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the gravity of what we'd discovered. I wasn't just fighting an HOA anymore. I was the landlord of everyone who'd been trying to destroy me. "This is legally bulletproof," Rebecca said, examining the corporate seal under her desk lamp. "Your grandfather was meticulous. Every document properly filed, every payment tracked, every legal requirement satisfied for 38 years. She pulled out a legal pad and started sketching our options like a general planning a campaign. Option A, reveal your landlord status immediately and negotiate HOA dissolution. Clean, simple, gets Margaret off your back permanently. Option B, selective enforcement. Terminate leases only for the harassment ringleaders. Margaret, her family, maybe 2 or 3 others. Let the innocent neighbors stay. Option C, full nuclear option. Media exposure of the entire scheme, federal investigation of HOA financial crimes, complete community upheaval. I thought about Jake reading those horrible Facebook posts, about my neighbors who'd been manipulated by Margaret's lies, about Grandpa Liu choosing to keep this power secret for decades. What about option D, use the leverage to build something better? Rebecca's eyebrows rose. Explain. Margaret's been stealing from these people while lying about property ownership. What if we expose the financial crimes but offer the community a way forward? Reduced rents, actual ownership opportunities, turn this toxic HOA into something that helps families instead of destroying them. While Rebecca researched legal precedents, I called my construction buddy Bill to help with technical preparation. We drove to his workshop where the familiar smell of copper wire and electrical components reminded me that I had skills beyond legal warfare. You're really going to need this recorded, Bill said, helping me test a professional-grade audio system. When you drop this bombshell, you want every word documented for legal protection. Back in my truck, I reflected on something I'd learned during my construction apprenticeship. The most powerful electrical systems aren't the ones that create the biggest sparks. They're the ones that deliver exactly the right amount of current to get the job done. Too little, and nothing happens. Too much, and you burn down the house. This situation required precisely calibrated power. That afternoon, I met with Beth Morrison, the HOA treasurer who'd been asking uncomfortable questions about the finances. We met at a neutral location, the local diner, where the scent of apple pie and honest conversation felt like sanctuary after weeks of legal warfare. I've been suspicious about our books for months, Beth confided over coffee that tasted like liquid courage. Margaret's been dodging audit requests while collecting unprecedented fees. We've paid $1.2 million in special assessments in 18 months, but I can't find records of where that money went. I slid photocopies of Margaret's fraudulent invoices across the table. Companies that didn't exist, services never performed, consulting fees that would make Congress blush. Beth's hands shook as she reviewed the evidence. She's been stealing from us while threatening our homes. But David, even if we expose her, how do we protect families who've invested their life savings in these properties? That's when I knew option D was the right choice. Over the next 2 days, Rebecca and I crafted a presentation that would serve multiple purposes. Expose Margaret's crimes while offering the community a path forward that honored both justice and compassion. The legal documents were prepared in triplicate, stored in multiple secure locations, with copies sent to federal investigators who specialize in HOA fraud cases. I also reached out to Jake for the first time since Lisa's angry phone call. My son's voice was small and hurt when he answered, but I could hear hope creeping in as I explained the truth about Margaret's lies. So you're not really in trouble, Dad? The stuff online about you being dangerous, it's all fake? Completely fabricated, buddy, and soon everyone will know the truth. But Jake, I need you to understand something important. When people try to hurt you with lies, the best response isn't more lies. It's the truth delivered at exactly the right moment. The community meeting was scheduled for Friday night at the Sunset Ridge Community Center. Margaret had called it as an emergency session to address the dangerous individual threatening our neighborhood. She had no idea she was about to provide the perfect stage for her own downfall. As I sat in my apartment that evening, listening to traffic sounds and watching city lights twinkle below, I felt Grandpa Lou's presence in the night air. He'd kept this secret for decades, waiting for the right person and the right moment to use it wisely. That moment had arrived, and unlike Margaret's campaign of destruction, this revelation would build something better from the ashes of her greed. Tomorrow night, truth would have its day in court. Margaret's desperation reached new heights when she tried to have me arrested on terrorism charges. The papers arrived Tuesday morning via emergency court filing, a petition claiming I was stockpiling explosive materials and making credible threats against community infrastructure. Margaret had somehow convinced a judge that I was dangerous enough to require immediate police intervention and possible federal investigation. The smell of fresh legal documents mixed with my morning coffee created a surreal breakfast atmosphere as I read through her latest work of fiction. According to Margaret's sworn statement, I had been conducting surveillance on neighborhood children, making threats about bringing down the entire system, and exhibiting classic signs of radicalization and violent extremism. She'd even included witness statements from 3 HOA members claiming I'd approached them at night, ranting about government conspiracies and threatening to make everyone pay for what they'd done. Complete fabrication, but terrifyingly official-looking with multiple notarized signatures and legal stamps. By noon, things escalated beyond legal documents. A convoy of pickup trucks appeared at the end of my access road, Margaret's citizen patrol, armed with hunting rifles and self-righteous fury. They weren't technically on my property, but their message was clear. Step out of line and face frontier justice. The metallic taste of fear mixed with mountain air as I watched them through binoculars from my apartment window. These weren't professional security guards, they were scared neighbors who'd been convinced I was a genuine threat to their families. Bill called with worse news. David, Margaret's brother-in-law, runs the County Emergency Management Office. He's planning to serve that terrorism warrant this afternoon with full tactical response. Claims you're armed and dangerous, requiring maximum force protocols. My blood went cold. During my construction days, I'd worked alongside guys who'd been victims of swatting incidents over neighbor disputes. Too many of those stories ended with body bags and accidental shootings during dynamic entries. But Margaret's overreach was also creating unexpected allies. That afternoon, Jake called, not crying this time, but furious with righteous anger that reminded me of his grandfather's steel backbone. "Dad, kids at school are showing me posts claiming you're planning to bomb the community center. This is insane. How can she just lie like this and nobody stops her?" "Because desperate people do desperate things, son, but sometimes their desperation becomes their downfall." Jake's voice grew steely with determination I'd never heard before. "What can I do to help? I'm not letting this crazy woman destroy our family with lies." While Margaret was busy painting me as a domestic terrorist, she was also frantically trying to cover her financial tracks. Rebecca's investigator discovered Margaret had been making substantial cash withdrawals from HOA accounts, $180,000 in the past 3 weeks alone. The money was supposedly for enhanced security consulting and emergency legal expenses. More telling, she'd been pressuring HOA members to sign loyalty pledges, promising not to cooperate with outside investigators trying to destroy our community. 4 families had already approached Rebecca quietly, terrified of Margaret but unwilling to publicly oppose her reign of financial terror. But Margaret's nuclear option backfired spectacularly. The terrorism petition required supporting documentation from law enforcement professionals. Margaret had submitted a threat assessment from Detective Frank Morrison claiming he'd observed me displaying textbook symptoms of domestic terrorism with imminent violence potential. Problem was, Detective Morrison had been dead for 8 months. Rebecca's investigator discovered the death certificate while verifying the assessment's authenticity. Margaret had literally forged a police threat evaluation using a deceased detective's stolen letterhead and signature stamp. That single desperate lie had just upgraded her legal troubles from civil fraud to federal document forgery, a felony carrying up to 15 years in prison. "She's completely unraveling," Rebecca said, reviewing the fraudulent evaluation. "This level of criminal behavior suggests someone facing massive financial exposure. The resort deal must have deadlines she can't extend." But Margaret wasn't finished destroying herself. Thursday evening brought her final, most spectacular mistake. Frustrated by the delayed police response, turns out judges get cranky about obviously forged law enforcement documents, Margaret decided to take matters into her own hands. Security cameras caught her sneaking onto my property around 1 a.m. carrying what appeared to be gasoline and road flares. Her plan was apparently to set a small fire near my construction materials, then call 911 claiming I was burning evidence of my terrorist activities. The irony was perfect. Margaret Thorne, who'd been calling me an arsonist for weeks, was literally attempting arson to frame me for arson. But my upgraded security system included motion-activated floodlights that turned midnight into noon the second she crossed my property line. Margaret found herself standing in my construction area, holding accelerant and ignition devices, illuminated like an actress on Broadway with 3 different camera angles recording her every move. Her scream of surprise and rage echoed across the mountain valley loud enough to wake wildlife in neighboring counties. As I watched her scramble back to her Lexus, I realized Margaret had just handed me the ultimate trump card, video evidence of her attempting to commit the exact crime she'd been accusing me of planning. Tomorrow's community meeting was going to be even more interesting than I'd anticipated. Margaret's final desperate gambit came with sirens, flashing lights, and the kind of media circus that destroys lives permanently. Friday morning, I woke to the sound of helicopter rotors and the acrid smell of exhaust fumes from a dozen emergency vehicles parked around my building. Through my apartment windows, I could see news vans, sheriff's deputies, and what looked like half the county's emergency response team setting up a perimeter in the parking lot. My phone was buzzing with missed calls from reporters, all asking variations of the same question. How do you respond to allegations that you're planning a terrorist attack on your own neighborhood? Terrorist attack? I stepped onto my balcony holding a cup of coffee and immediately had 6 rifle scopes trained on my chest. "David Chen," Sheriff Williams' voice boomed through a megaphone. "You are surrounded. Come out with your hands visible and move slowly." The taste of surreal terror mixed with morning air as I realized Margaret had played her nuclear card. She'd convinced law enforcement that I was some kind of domestic terrorist preparing for a violent rampage. Bill's voice crackled through my phone. "David, don't move a muscle. Margaret filed reports claiming you threatened to blow up tonight's community meeting. She's got photos of you handling suspicious packages and testimony from multiple witnesses." The suspicious packages? Bags of concrete mix for my cabin foundation. The witnesses? Probably the same imaginary people who'd provided statements for her fraudulent police evaluation. But this time, Margaret had overestimated the competence of local law enforcement. Sheriff Williams approached my door cautiously, his expression more embarrassed than aggressive. "David, I know this is probably bogus, but we got federal authorities breathing down our necks about credible terrorist threats. I need you to let us search the place so we can clear this mess up." "Search away, Sheriff, but you might want to check out the security footage from last night first." I handed him the USB drive containing Margaret's midnight arson attempt. Williams's face went through several interesting color changes as he watched our HOA president caught red-handed with gasoline and flares, trying to burn down the property she'd been claiming I wanted to destroy. "Well, hell," he muttered, "that's going to complicate her credibility significantly." While the bomb squad spent 4 hours confirming that concrete mix was in fact concrete mix, Rebecca was busy filing emergency motions to have Margaret arrested for filing false police reports, attempted arson, and terrorist threat hoaxes, federal crimes that would put her away for decades. But the media circus was just getting started. By afternoon, news crews from 3 states had arrived, drawn by reports of a mountain standoff with an alleged domestic terrorist. Margaret, ever the opportunist, positioned herself as the heroic community leader protecting innocent families from a dangerous extremist. Standing in front of cameras with perfect makeup and practiced tears, she painted a picture of a peaceful neighborhood terrorized by an unstable outsider with a grudge against civilization itself. "This individual has threatened our children, destroyed our sense of safety, and now he's apparently prepared to commit mass violence rather than follow simple community guidelines," Margaret sobbed into the microphones. "We just want our neighborhood back." The performance was Academy Award caliber if the Academy gave awards for creative fiction, but Margaret's media strategy contained a fatal flaw. In her rush to appear sympathetic, she'd agreed to multiple live interviews without consulting lawyers, and live television doesn't allow for editing out inconvenient truths. Channel 12's investigative reporter Sandra Kim had done her homework. During what Margaret thought would be a softball interview, Sandra casually mentioned the HOA's financial irregularities. "Mrs. Thorne, records show your association has collected over $1.2 million in special assessments in 18 months. Can you explain where that money was spent?" Margaret's confident expression flickered like a candle in wind. "Well, we've had significant legal expenses dealing with this dangerous individual." "But the legal expenses listed in your public filings total only $34,000. Where did the other $1.16 million go?" The pause that followed lasted about 4 seconds on television but felt like 4 years in real time. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, while her brain tried to manufacture an answer that wouldn't incriminate her further. That's confidential community business," she finally stammered. "Confidential? Mrs. Thorne, you're discussing this matter on live television while accusing your neighbor of terrorism. Surely financial transparency is relevant to your credibility." By evening, the story had shifted from dangerous mountain hermit threatens community to HOA president accused of massive fraud while filing false terror reports. Social media was buzzing with questions about Margaret's financial management and the suspicious timing of her escalating accusations. The hashtag #HOA scam was trending across 3 states. As the last news van disappeared down the mountain road, leaving behind only tire tracks and the lingering smell of diesel exhaust, I realized Margaret had just committed professional suicide on live television. Tonight's community meeting would be less about her accusations against me and more about her explanations to neighbors whose money she'd been stealing. The hunted had just become the hunter. The Sunset Ridge Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. 127 people packed into a space designed for maybe 75, with news cameras positioned along the walls and county officials occupying the front row like judges at a trial. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with the scent of stale coffee and decades-old carpet created an atmosphere thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. Margaret stood at the podium like a general addressing troops before the final battle. Her PowerPoint presentation was titled "Protecting Our Community, the David Chen Threat Assessment." She dressed for victory, sharp business suit, perfect makeup, voice projection that would make Broadway directors weep with envy. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, clicking to a slide showing my construction site, "we gather tonight to address the clear and present danger that David Chen represents to our peaceful community." I sat in the back row wearing my cleanest work shirt and holding a leather document folder that contained enough legal dynamite to level mountains. Rebecca sat beside me, occasionally glancing at her phone where federal investigators were sending real-time updates about Margaret's financial crimes. Margaret's presentation was masterful manipulation. Photos of my threatening construction project, screenshots of my menacing social media presence, actually pictures of electrical work I'd posted to help other contractors, charts showing declining property values in areas with transient populations. This individual owes our community $127,000 in accumulated fines and legal fees," Margaret announced, her voice rising with righteous indignation. "He has repeatedly threatened violence against families, attempted to intimidate our children, and yesterday was investigated by federal authorities for terrorist activities." The crowd murmured with fearful approval. These were good people who'd been fed a steady diet of lies for months, and Margaret's performance was convincing enough to sell ice to Eskimos in August. "Furthermore," she continued, clicking to a financial slide, "Mr. Chen's continued presence threatens a major economic development opportunity that could benefit every family in this room. Mountain Peak Resorts has offered our community partnership in a $75 million project that would create jobs and increase property values significantly." There it was. The real motivation finally revealed in public, recorded by 4 news cameras and witnessed by county officials. Margaret had just admitted on the record that this entire harassment campaign was about clearing my land for developers. She opened the floor for victim impact statements, and 4 rehearsed neighbors delivered tearful testimonies about feeling unsafe and terrorized by my presence. The performance was so synchronized it looked like community theater with very bad acting. Then Margaret made the mistake that would haunt her forever. "Does anyone else have concerns about this dangerous individual threatening our community?" I stood up slowly, my leather folder tucked under one arm like a briefcase full of destiny. "I do, actually." Margaret's confident smile faltered like a mask slipping off a face. You're not a member of this community. You have no right to speak here." "Actually, Margaret," I said, walking calmly toward the front of the room, "I think you'll find I have every right to speak. In fact, I have more rights in this room than anyone else." The crowd's murmur shifted from supportive to confused. Margaret's face was turning the color of old snow as I approached the podium with measured steps. "My name is David Chen," I announced to the room, "and I'm the sole owner of Liu Holdings, LLC. I opened my folder and removed Grandpa Liu's incorporation documents, holding them high enough for the cameras to capture, which means I'm the legal landlord of every single house in this subdivision." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear individual heartbeats. Then the room exploded into chaos. Gasps, shouts, the scraping of chairs as people turned to stare at neighbors they'd never realized were fellow tenants. A woman in the 3rd row fainted. Someone in the back started crying. Margaret grabbed for my documents like a drowning woman reaching for a life preserver. "That's impossible. This is our neighborhood. We own these homes." "You own the structures, Margaret, but the land underneath, that belongs to me, has for 38 years through my grandfather's holding company." I spread the property deeds across the podium like playing cards in a winning hand. "Every monthly payment you thought was going to your mortgage company was actually rent forwarded to Liu Holdings. Every HOA fee you've been collecting, you've been stealing money from people for managing land you don't own." Sheriff Williams stepped forward, his expression grim with understanding. "Mrs. Thorne, you've been collecting association fees on property that belongs to Mr. Chen?" Margaret's mask finally cracked completely. "You can't do this. I've spent years building this community. You're just some immigrant who doesn't belong here." The racist slip hung in the air like toxic gas, recorded by every camera in the room. "Actually," I said, pulling out the rent payment records, "you're 4 months behind on your own rent, which means I have legal grounds to evict you with 30 days' notice." The room erupted again. Margaret lunged for the documents, screaming about property rights and community standards until Sheriff Williams was forced to restrain her physically. "But I'm not here for revenge," I announced over the chaos, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I'm here to offer partnership. Those of you who participated in harassment campaigns have 30 days to find new housing. Everyone else, your rent just got cut in half, and we're building a real community together." As federal agents entered the room to arrest Margaret for wire fraud, document forgery, and filing false police reports, her final scream echoed through the mountains. "You can't do this to me. I am this community." "No, Margaret," I said quietly, watching the handcuffs click around her wrists. "Communities aren't built on theft and lies. They're built on truth, cooperation, and treating people with basic human dignity." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Margaret Thorne was led away in handcuffs, her empire of corruption collapsing like a house of cards in a windstorm. 4 months later, I was sitting on my completed cabin porch watching Jake and 3 neighborhood kids build a treehouse in what used to be Margaret's restricted access common area when my phone rang with news that made my heart soar. "Dad," Jake's voice bubbled with excitement, "I got into Montana Tech with a partial scholarship, and you know what convinced the admissions committee? My essay about how my father taught me that real strength isn't about getting revenge on people who hurt you. It's about building something better from the ashes of their mistakes." Margaret Thorne was serving 36 months in federal prison, plus paying $340,000 in restitution to the families she'd defrauded. 8 of her harassment enablers had quietly moved away, their leases terminated and their crimes documented for posterity. The remaining 15 neighbors had embraced our community transformation with enthusiasm that surprised everyone, especially me. The smell of barbecue smoke drifted from Bill's backyard, where half the neighborhood was gathered for our monthly potluck dinner. These same people who'd once viewed me as a dangerous outsider now brought me casseroles, borrowed my tools, and asked my advice on everything from plumbing problems to teenager management. It's incredible how quickly fear dissolves when the person spreading it disappears. The community transformation exceeded my wildest dreams, Rebecca observed, joining Jake and me on the porch with a beer and the satisfied smile of someone who'd helped David slay Goliath. Our professional relationship had bloomed into something deeper, built on mutual respect and shared victory over institutional corruption. With rent reduced to half their previous mortgage payments, families suddenly had money for home improvements, their children's education, and actual emergency savings. Mrs. Patterson had started a thriving community garden where Margaret's aesthetic compliance committee used to issue citations for unapproved flower colors. The kids who'd once been taught to fear me now knocked on my door asking for help with science projects drawn by stories of the carpenter who'd outsmarted the adults with nothing but patience and legal documents. But the most meaningful change was the Liu Wei Chen Community Justice Fund, established with money recovered from Margaret's fraudulent schemes. The fund now provided free legal aid for families fighting corrupt homeowner associations across 5 states and had already helped expose similar financial crimes in 23 communities. "We got another call yesterday," Rebecca reported, checking her phone. Family in Nevada facing the exact same playbook. City council trying to condemn their ranch for a shopping mall using the same bogus community benefit arguments Margaret used for her resort deal. Jake looked up from his college acceptance letter, eyes blazing with inherited determination. "Are we going to help them, Dad?" "We're going to try, son. Grandpa Lou taught me that real power builds communities instead of tearing them down." The financial resolution had been surprisingly healing. Rather than maximizing profits, I'd offered longtime residents the opportunity to purchase their land at cost with zero-interest financing through the Justice Fund. Most chose to stay and become genuine homeowners for the first time in decades. The development rights Margaret had promised to Mountain Peak Resorts, I donated them to the Montana Conservation Trust, ensuring the surrounding wilderness would remain wild for Jake's children and their grandchildren to explore. Property values had actually increased, despite, or perhaps because of, the cooperation that replaced Margaret's authoritarian control. Turns out people pay premium prices to live where neighbors help, instead of harass each other. As purple twilight settled over the mountain peaks and stars began appearing in the crystal-clear sky, I reflected on Grandpa Lou's profound wisdom. He'd kept the secret of land ownership for decades, waiting for the right person and moment to use that power constructively. Some secrets are too dangerous for weak hands, but become instruments of justice in strong ones. Jake was reading college brochures by porchlight when Rebecca handed me a thick envelope postmarked from Las Vegas. "That Nevada family I mentioned, they've heard about our victory and want to know if the guy who destroyed an entire corrupt HOA can help them save their century-old ranch from corporate greed." I opened the envelope, breathing in the scent of hope and new challenges. Another David versus Goliath story. Another chance to prove that ordinary people with extraordinary determination can still triumph against corrupt systems. "Ready for your old man to take on City Hall next, Jake?" His grin was pure mischief mixed with fierce pride. "Let's do it, Dad. But this time, I want to help with the legal research." As we planned our next battle for justice, children's laughter echoed across the valley where Margaret's angry threats used to ring. Sometimes the sweetest victory is building something so beautiful it erases the memory of ugliness. Drop a comment sharing your own HOA nightmare story. You're not alone in these battles, and your experience might help other families fighting similar corruption. If this story helped you understand your rights against predatory community associations, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. We expose HOA corruption and the legal weapons ordinary people can use to fight back. Next week, when City Council tried to steal our family ranch for Walmart, they had no idea about Great-Grandpa's mining claims. Thanks for watching HOA Justice Stories. If this episode made you cheer for the underdog or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen Chaos and neighborhood justice stories every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story of ordinary people fighting back against corruption.